Good afternoon. Welcome. This is week 7, the national parks, the big idea. I am Cecilia Griffin Golden, and I am the program director for the African American Heritage House, the people who are sponsoring today's speaker. Before I go on with the program, I want you to take a few seconds to look around at the beauty that surrounds all of us, to think about the beautiful lake that is very near to us, and to really be grateful for it. The African American Heritage House acknowledges that we exist on land that indigenous peoples have inhabited for more than 13,000 years. We lament the displacement of the Haudenosaunee peoples in particular, knowing that we are all beneficiaries of the violent theft of their land every day. We also honor the sovereignty of the 6 nations, the Cayuga, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Mohawk, the Seneca, and the Tuscarora. And we stand with them and hope you do as well in their mission for sovereignty and decolonization. Thank you very much. So, the African American Heritage House. We are informed by the African American experience. We are strategic friends of the Chautauqua Institution, and we work collaboratively to ensure that the history that is presented is done with accuracy and vibrancy. Our mission is to elevate the voices of the marginalized, particularly African Americans, so that those voices are heard by more and the history is understood by all. We do this through quality programming. Our programs include having speakers each week that align with the theme of the Chautauqua Institution. We hold Sunday porch chats at 1 o'clock at the Athenaeum Hotel. We hold speaker receptions every Tuesday at 3:30 at 40 Scott. 40 Scott is the address of the African American Heritage House. And we also hold open houses there Thursdays from 11:30 to 1 o'clock, where you can read the storyboards that depict the history of African Americans at the Chautauqua Institution since 1874. I invite you to do that. You will certainly enjoy it. I also want you to know that as we do today, we have a speaker 3:30 on Wednesdays at the Hall of Philosophy every week, and we hold or host a Chautauqua Dialogue every Thursday at 40 Scott, where we talk about the speaker of Wednesday. So if you are so inclined, tomorrow you can come to 40 Scott at 4 o'clock and engage in the Chautauqua Dialogue about today's speaker. I have another announcement that I want to make. There is a film being showed at 5:15 at the cinema, Chautauqua Cinema, Why We Walk. It is about the power of walking, the experiences of African Americans in the outdoors. That's 5:15 today for those of you who do not know about that. Without further ado, let me introduce to you our speaker, the one that we had originally invited, Cassius Cash, joined thousands of others in having his plane canceled, his flight canceled. And I don't want to use the word replacement or substitute, because David Lamfrom is not a substitute or a replacement. I believe that all things work together as they're supposed to be, even though we may not understand it. David is a phenomenal humanitarian. He has the coveted opportunity to have his passion, his purpose, and his position all align as regional vice president of the National Parks Conservancy Association. Cassius is the president of that same organization. David has held many positions, and he has studied many fields. He has conducted diverse wildlife and agricultural research. He has held fields in aquaculture, agricultural biology, herpetology, which is the study of reptiles. He is a naturalist, and has led successful efforts in non-mechanized mangrove restorations in Biscayne, Florida. David is a graduate of New College in Florida, where he also studied Native American studies and art. He is a published author, he has traveled extensively, and he is a photographer of wildlife. He has all of these things, and when you talk to him, you will find out that national parks are not a place. They are about relationships. Relationships with our nature, relationships with diverse cultures, relationships with each other. He uses his passion, his purpose, his position, and his knowledge to help others learn about the national parks, but also, very importantly, to protect them. Without further ado, I bring to you our brilliant speaker today, David Lamfrom. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia. That's actually everything I was going to say. Everybody have a wonderful day. I'm just kidding. Yesterday, I was informed that I was not Cash. And I have to live with that every day. I want to co-sign the land acknowledgement that was given. It was beautiful and important. Thank you. When we offer land acknowledgements, that the spirit and intention of them matter, and what we really want is that every action that we take furthers sovereignty. And when we give land acknowledgements, what we're doing is we're not only recognizing what has happened in the past, but the perseverance and power of folks who are making it and who are thriving and who are surviving, who are living in this world, right? We're not talking about ancient cultures. We're talking about folks who made it through, right? And who are living and doing, right? And who are still stewards of this world, and who are still teaching us. I had this, as I was falling asleep last night, I had this pretty dark thought, which was, I was originally here to interview Cash, who's a person who I have deep respect for. I was also here, this is my second time at Chautauqua. I was here last year. I was here to interview Terry Tempest Williams. And as I was kind of thinking about all that, I was thinking about it in my mind, I was thinking about the interview with Terry Tempest Williams, and it was, I asked her some really difficult questions. And she was really vulnerable. And it got really, really personal. And I was just thinking, if the shoe was on the other foot, who would be the most frightening person to interview me? And the answer came to my mind in less than 1 second. It was my mom. And I was thinking about what questions my mom would ask me if she was interviewing me. And I thought, question number 1, what's wrong with you? Question number 2, who do you think you are? And the funniest thing about that whole thought is that it really relaxed me, because I was like, as long as my mom's not interviewing me, this is going to be great. I want to express my incredible gratitude to the African American Heritage House. It's an honor to be able to come here and share with you all. There's a lot of things that I want to do as a speaker. One of the things that I want to do is I want to reduce the hierarchy. I don't want to simply be an expert who's talking to you. I really want to engage. I want to help humans think about things that they may not have thought about before, or maybe think about them in different ways. And most importantly, I want to have dialogue, and I want to recognize the knowledge and wisdom in this room. And so when we get to the Q&A, I really do invite you all into a conversation. I also want to do something else, which is a different kind of welcoming. When folks talk about DEI, another component of DEI is belonging. Belonging is incredibly important. And I just want everybody in this room, I just want you all to know that I and we are really, really happy that you're here. Hope you're all doing okay. We're glad to be with you. We want to hear from you. Now we're all in this space together. Before, there was just a person on a stage who was going to tell you stuff. But we don't have to settle for those dynamics. We can do better than that. Last thing I'll say to that end is that time together is a blessing. And I'm so glad that we have it to share together. And I'm going to take my time, and I would love to just connect with you all, hear from you, and let's have some real conversations. Let's talk about some real stuff, and let's have incredible amounts of grace for each other so that we can be vulnerable and that we can ask real questions. I want to say hello to all my friends at all the Rhodes Scholars who are here. I've had the privilege of presenting to the Rhodes Scholars in the morning, last couple of mornings. We've talked about a couple of different topics. We've talked about, all right, check this out, Brazilian ecology and deserts across the world. So we've been doing a deep dive on the ecology of the world. We've been talking about national parks all across the world. We've been talking about why they matter. We've been talking about what are the implications of national parks. We've been talking about things like what animals still live on this earth because we have national parks, right? Because we can ask ourselves those questions. We can ask ourselves. Firstly, if we didn't have national parks, would we still have tigers? And then we could ask ourselves the more important part of that question, which is, if we lose tigers, what does that mean for us? And who are we in a world where we lost them? Yesterday at the African American Heritage House, we had a really profound conversation. We had, and it's really nice to see all of you who were there from that conversation, but we got down for probably about an hour 30, hour 45, and just had some really serious conversations about issues like intersectionality, like identity, I led a small conversation about what it feels like to be multiracial. We talked about loneliness. We talked about the relativity of privilege. Incredibly important conversations and topics. And I do want to invite, as we get into the Q&A, if anybody wants to bring any segments of that conversation into this space, I welcome that, because it was really rich and powerful. It would be disingenuous of me to not spend a little time that I have up here today talking about Cassius Cash. So Cash is a person who I really admire. Cash is the first Black superintendent of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And to make sure that I give some real context to that, Great Smoky Mountains National Park is the most visited national park in our country. Last year, the park had something like 14 million visitors. And some maybe a little bit more internal facing, but the dynamics of the national park system are that the superintendents who run the biggest, most famous, and most popular parks have a tremendous amount of power and influence. And for those many, many, many years, nearly 100 that Great Smokies has existed, we are for the first time seeing Black superintendent, and Cash is doing a remarkable job. I'm going to tell you 2 quick stories about Cash. They're really important. I want to tell you how I met him. And I don't think I've ever told this story publicly before, but it's okay. We're going to do that. I moved to the southeast. I moved to Knoxville, Tennessee from the California desert after many, many years of my life working to protect that place, a place that I love very deeply, a place where we were able to build incredible community and build trust and get millions of acres of conservation done, create new national parks, create new national monuments, protect sacred sites. And we'll talk about that a little bit. As I moved, we quickly entered into the pandemic, and into the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter movement really took full swing. As I'm sure everybody understands, that is a divisive issue in the state of Tennessee. One day, I got a telephone call saying that a black bear had been killed. It had been slung over a park sign, and a message had been spray painted, "Black lives don't matter here." I would refer to that as suboptimal, but I'm also understated, so. Cash and I had a relationship because of my position. I had met him, we were cordial, we had worked together on a couple of issues, but we didn't really know each other. And when that happened, our community had a decision to make. The decision was, what were we going to do? Were we going to politicize this? Were we going to try to fight this in the media? Were we going to try to bring some political power in? How are we going to deal with this? Like, what is, this action which could be perceived in all types of ways, none of which are good, some of which might be dangerous, and one in which we didn't know to what extent that was targeted at the superintendent. Right? So we had a real, right, what I would call it is we had a moment of character, right? Where we had to figure out who we wanted to be, right? Who did we want to be in that moment? And what we determined that we were going to do is, instead of doing anything that was public or external, that we were going to gather as much community together as we could, and we were going to send a letter to the park telling the park that we were with them. So NPCA, Urban League, NAACP, really the entire conservation community, community groups, worked on this letter, sent this letter in, and after I sent that letter in, I got the call from Cash. And he just said, "Now I know who you really are." And from that point, we developed a real friendship. And sometimes that's what it takes, right? In a world where it's easy, right, where what are the critical parts of our minds tell us that what the world wants from us is for us to be perfect. The reality is that the world doesn't want that from us at all. The world wants us to be vulnerable and honest. We need some surface area to connect to each other, and that can only be achieved through vulnerability. That was an intense and vulnerable moment, and through that moment, we were able to build a connection. Second story I want to tell is about the action that Cash took that is, it is the thing that he has done that I have been connected to, of which I am the most proud. So, after the killing of George Floyd, NPCA, we were monitoring not only what's happening in the world, but also what's happening within the Park Service, right? We wanted to see what the Park Service might do about this issue, if anything. And there's probably something like, I don't know, probably something like 300 superintendents in the country. And there was only one superintendent who took an action, and that was Cash. I kind of like this haunting noise. It's like me and a ghost presenting together. Cash created a program called Hikes for Healing. And that program basically invited folks to come out and take walks and be led in facilitated dialogue around issues of race, which could have been a risky move, frankly. Right? The only superintendent who's going to take any action after, right, all the things that were happening in the country is the black superintendent of one of the most important parks in our nation. Right? That's pretty risky, but also pretty brave and pretty amazing. And for that, NPCA actually granted our Mather Award to Cash. But I also want to say I had the privilege of serving as a facilitator in that program. And so I had a firsthand look at what that actually meant. And one of the things that I want to speak to is that there was an incredible energy of human beings who maybe had some ideas about stuff, but weren't ready to really start having conversations, and who actually took that time as a call to action, who actually started getting together and having conversations and trying, however difficult and how many times a day would tumble. And during many of the walks I led, there was some real hard tumbling. There was coming back from tough moments. I led one particular conversation where, and this is really tricky, so please don't judge me. I asked, all right, let's go around the circle. So we went for a long walk. We sat in a circle. The first thing we talked about was how much life had happened in that space. Right before settlement, how many people had been married in that space? How many people had fallen in love in that space? How many people's family had died in that space, right? Because part of this issue is of bringing people together is about conferring humanity. And it's so easy to create distance in your mind, and when you create that distance in your mind, because it's hard to look at, you view it as a way of being efficient. You're like, I just can't do that right now. But it's a way of closing your heart off. And so my strategy was, how are we going to open folks' hearts up, right? And so we had that conversation, and then I was like, all right, let's do something fun. Let's go around the circle, and let's name every famous athlete we can. We went around the circle 10 times. I was like, wonderful. Okay, let's name any famous Native Americans you know. Right? Circle got quiet. We got to like 4, right? And then I had to have that conversation to say, what we are demonstrating is that for people who had been in these places for all time, we collectively in this circle know 4 names. And then there was the comeback, which was, why do you think that is? And why do you think people might not want you to know that? And instead of feeling shame, maybe we can get a little mad. And maybe we can take it upon ourselves, take on some personal responsibility to really do some learning, to really dig in and do some learning. As long as I can remember, the thing that has driven me more than any other thing in my life has been my, I don't want to say obsessive, but near obsessive love of wildlife. From the moment I can remember, when I found, like the books that my mom has, just everything I've drawn, everything. I have, for as long as I can remember, wanted to know every single thing I can about life on this earth. And I just want to make sure that I am really honest to say that as I've had this incredible career, when I say that I have found my heart's desire, I would not be lying. I'm doing a job that I believe I was made to do, and that I couldn't be any happier. Yet I still want to communicate that working in the environmental movement as a person of color, I feel like a salmon swimming up a stream. And I'm very happy to hold the complexity of how beautiful the world is, how complex life is, how complex humanity is, how much privilege I have, and that there are systems in place that when people see me, they don't think I'm going to be your speaker, right? And that all that can be true. And that being true doesn't have to stop us from doing what we have to do, right? And the importance of believing people when they tell you what their experiences are. I think that's an issue that we have run into, I think, throughout the last many years as we have been hearing people, I think, and one of the instincts has been to interrogate. But when people are saying, hey, I've been hurt, hey, I'm struggling, we shouldn't blame them. We should hold them, right? I want to tell you 2 stories about the natural world that I believe are going to make you incredibly happy. The first one I told to my friends at Rhodes Scholars, so friends, tell me if it's better or worse the second time around. We talked a little bit about why national parks matter. In our country, national parks, right, as was beautifully said, they're not just places. It's an idea, and it's an idea that helps us, basically builds the conscientiousness of our nation. It's our memory and our rememory. In other nations, national parks are primarily, but not exclusively, natural landscapes. There's a place in Brazil called Imas National Park, a place that I'm going to tell you about that would not have been protected if not for, and literally because as you go to this national park, you have farmland on every single side of it. An island, a UNESCO preserve that's protecting the most intense biodiversity you could ever imagine, completely surrounded by agriculture. Emas is the place in the world that has the most termite mounds. That might not sound exciting to some people, but it's really cool. Every year, and I want you to visualize this, every year, so the Emas is a grassland. It's a tropical grassland, which is an incredibly biologically rich system. It's a place where you have anteaters, and you have jaguars, and you have parrots, and you have macaws. It's loud with birdsong. Squawking, parrots squawk. You all may know that. They squawk a lot. It's really, and they start at about 5:41 a.m., give or take 0 minutes. Emas, when the rainy season starts, all the termites start to fly. And they go to different mounds. And folks may know that if you live in a place where you have, say, flying ants, and those flying ants start when rainy season starts. It's something that happens all over the world. It's a natural phenomenon that happens in many, many places on this earth. In Emas, there is a beetle. That beetle lives on the termite mounds. The beetle is phosphorescent. And so when the termites start flying, the beetles start glowing to attract the termites in who are attracted to light. And at a system level, when you see it, millions upon millions of termite mounds are glowing like it's Christmas with a green glow, which is the most beautiful thing I can imagine, which was lost in every place surrounding this national park, but which still survives in this national park itself, right? And again, what is that? That's not, right? That's not just great job conservation. It's that people and governments believed in an idea enough to protect some part of this world. We are the earth. In the California desert in 2015, the most amazing thing that I've ever experienced happened. Nobody knew it was going to happen, and when it happened, most people didn't know it was happening. In 2015, maybe something like 40 million Joshua trees all bloomed at the same time. From Nevada to, over the course of maybe something like 70 miles, a continuous band of Joshua trees all bloomed in unison. And when that happened, birds and bees, insects, wildlife, all gathered. And one of the things that's amazing about a desert is it's really quiet, except when it's not. But also, on days when it wasn't particularly windy, the entire world smelled like lavender and coconut. Could you imagine that? And what was so profound, and when that happened, we let folks know it happened. All the scientists had all these theories about why it may have been happening. But the interesting thing is that nobody ever knew that it did happen. Right? That was in Mojave National Preserve, in the third largest national park unit in the lower 48. As we think about, I want to make sure that I introduce a concept, maybe some new thinking, maybe not. The concept is around connection to nature. And one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, I'm one of those people where the thoughts just kind of roll around in my head like I'm a rock tumbler or something. They just roll around and they roll around, they roll around. Maybe they lose their hard edges. Maybe they shine up nice. Maybe they're garbage and you got to throw them out. The idea of possessing access to nature. For example, people saying, hey, I really want to connect you to nature. And as I think about that more and more, I just start thinking about what does our humanity mean? And who are we? Right? Are we not all nature? And is nature something that somebody else can connect you to? And if somebody else has to, have they taken your dignity? Or have they taken your humanity? Does our nature not come from inside of us? Can anybody else connect us? Maybe somebody can help reawaken our connection, right? But we are all, in fact, right? We are the earth and from the earth, right? We are places. I have the privilege of doing work as an advocate, work which, if I was trying to do that work in Guatemala, people might kill me, right? And in all those places where it is dangerous to do that work, people still do. Each and every one. And the idea that communities of color need to be connected to nature, I just want to say, nah. I just want to say nah. Because if you look around this earth which is predominantly brown and black, there's just environmentalists everywhere. They just don't call themselves that. This is our birthright, and this is intrinsic to who we each are. We are nature. One last discussion point that I want to make is around stories and expectations. The stories that we tell create the world that we live in. The world that we live in creates expectations, and those expectations create shapes. Do folks know about the concept of a Platonic ideal? I felt like it was appropriate being in this hall. Bring up one kind of Greek-ish-y thing. Does anybody know what the Platonic ideal is? It's almost that there's like a form, a perfect form. And I think about that, I think about like a scorpion or a turtle, right? Or a crab, shapes that are remade and remade and remade in environments all over the world all the time, right? Because they just work. And in our mind, I think we take those same ideas and we make these cookie cutters. And I think that with those cookie cutters, we cut out who does what and who is what. And I just want to challenge, gently, kindly, sweetly, challenge that concept. When we believe that certain people do certain things, it creates these pathways. And for those who weren't expected, that road is harder to walk. And it doesn't mean that folks don't gain real value from that walk if you make it through, but how many folks don't? And how many folks don't try? And what happens psychologically? Right? What happens psychologically to people who are told, you are not this, or you can't do this, or you shouldn't do this, or why are you here, or what are you doing here? Right? Even if it's meant in good ways. Right? What does all that mean? What does all that do? What does all that do psychologically? What it does is it splits people's soul into parts. That's what it does. And for somebody like me, I couldn't help it. I was going to have to figure out how to do this. But I had this weird infection from the beginning, and I'm also just stubborn and not that smart. So I was gonna do this. But if we agree that we are nature, and we agree that environmentalists are everywhere, and we agree that healing our relationship with our idea of self as it relates to nature, that people are not separate from nature, but rather that people are nature, as part of a reconciliation for each of us and our souls, then we gotta actually make room for folks who want to be there. And what we talked about yesterday at the African American Heritage House was, do you know any kids that don't love animals? Do you know any kids that don't love flowers, that don't love outside? Right? So what happens is, it's something that happens along the way. It's the cues that humans get from the world around them, because people are smart, and people are caring, and people want to protect themselves, and people want to be validated by community, right? All of which are incredibly good things. So I got the magical hand signals, which means that we're going to move to dialogue. Are you going to come back up? Welcome back up, friend.
Thank you, David, for that reminder that we are nature. And we're going to have a Q&A, as was stated. Electronically, you would type in questions.chq.org. If you need paper, Melanie, one of our program interns, or Sydney, another one, will pass you out paper. So if you need some paper, please raise your hand. While we're doing that, I need to tell you that the African American Heritage House is indeed a 501c3 nonprofit, and all that we do because of donations and contributions of friends like you. We are governed by a board of directors, the chair of which is Errol Davis. Errol, would you please raise your hand, stand up, he's behind us. He's accompanied by his beautiful wife, Elaine. And do we have other board members here today? Because I don't want to ignore anyone. Okay, so you're doing your questions. And while you're doing that, what month do these Joshua trees bloom?
You think you're going to get that secret that easy? So it doesn't, what's remarkable about that is that a bloom like that might happen once every 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, or in the case of that, Joshua tree may bloom a couple times in its lifetime. But something happened on planet Earth where they all bloomed all at once. And the desert's pretty amazing. So the month that it did happen, it was late April. It was up at about 5,000 feet in the Mojave Desert. And those Joshua trees shared space with some of the oldest plants on the planet. So next to the Joshua trees, you have these yuccas that'll be 10 feet tall or less, and they'll be 3,000 years old. And you'll have creosotes that can, believe it or not, have been dated back to 11,700 years old. And something that we talked about with the Rhodes Scholars was that time exists differently in deserts, because time is based on growing seasons. But in an arid land, what does a growing season mean? What does that even mean?
Thank you. What are the responsibilities of a superintendent of a national park?
Pick up the phone when I call. I'm just kidding. So the national parks, they're incredibly diverse. So some units are really, really small, and a superintendent will be in charge of making sure that all the operations can occur well, that there's interpretation, that the resources are being protected, that there's maintenance, that the place is safe. In some places there's search and rescue. In big parks, they have auto mechanic shops. In really big parks, it's like being a city manager. But then also having a real community and political role. So it's a really amazing job, a really cool job, and we're enormously proud of Cash for the role that he's playing in the work he's doing at Smokies.
Thank you. What is the relationship between the NPS and the MPCS?
So the relationship, it's a great question. The relationship is that when the National Park Service was created, many of the folks who created it realized that incredible system could not be protected from within, and that an advocacy group, an external group, had to exist in order to protect it. And so our job is to make sure that the tenets of the Park Service, that the tenets of the Organic Act, that the reasons for which we have protected these places will stand. And in some cases, that might mean that we are going to disagree with the Park Service itself. But in many cases, we're working with them to help protect these really incredible resources, to tell these stories, to make sure that there's community support. As you can imagine, with 425 units, there's every type of relationship between communities and national parks.
Thank you. Please identify the one human being by name who is of utmost importance to you, and the one place of all that is of utmost importance to you.
What kind of monster asked this question? Who would do that? Oh my God.
Okay, I didn't see it.
My mom doesn't have the internet. And so I can say whatever I want to say. No, my mom is the person of utmost importance to me. My mom is is the person who I know who has had the hardest life of any human being that I know, and also the person who has done the most for the most people. Just the most tireless and selfless human I've ever met, and tough, and this tall, and so bad. Just like a bad lady. And she doesn't believe, although she was born in Jamaica and moved here when she was 27 years old, she doesn't believe she has a Jamaican accent, although it's very, very, very thick. The place that is the most important to me that's very difficult, but there's a particular spring in the Mojave Desert that's connected to basically the stories of how you get to water. So there are these songs. So for the Chemehuevi people in the Mojave Desert, the way that the Chemehuevi historically moved across one of the driest places on the earth was by singing songs. And I had the opportunity to help protect for over maybe 15 years of my career. This particular spring, which was at the center, it's the largest source of water, over 10,000 square miles. And while we were trying to protect it, and when things were good and when things were bad, we'd have all-night prayers. We'd go to the spring, and we would sing all night and just pray that we would be able to protect this place and protect culture. And so I feel so strongly connected to that place because of those actions. And also those folks could sing, and I would always get so tired, and they would just kind of shake me up, and we would just have to keep going. And I just learned a lot. I learned a lot about what it meant to really be all in. It was a different level of being all in because the relationships were different. The relationships, right? It wasn't intellectual. It was spiritual. It was about the perseverance of culture. It was about something bigger. And I got connected to something bigger.
Thank you. How do we manage our most popular parks so that we don't love them to death, so that they are not so overcrowded that the experience is less than wonderful? Is having reservations the best idea?
It's a great question. It depends on the place. There's a lot of places where we don't need it. There's a lot of places where we're not getting enough visitation. We actually need more people to love a lot of places. So I want to make sure that we are always, however difficult to hold to complexity that we can. The vast majority of national parks are under-visited, right? And there's probably about 15 that really are getting crushed. And so I guess my simple suggestion should be, folks should go backpacking with Mark Wenzler. No, I'm just kidding. The reality is that it's going to be a multi-pronged approach. One of the things is helping make sure that that in the places that we have moved forward with reservation systems, as is always the case, the changes are really hard and folks really don't like it at first. But then when folks get used to it, they think it's pretty good. And so I'm not going to say it's a perfect system, but it's a pretty smart system because you're actually able to understand how many people are going to go to any particular place and make sure that folks can have, right? Because the real question is about the values and what is it that we're trying to protect, right? And do folks want to be able to have quiet? Do folks, right, what are the values? And that's the question that you have to ask, and the answer can only come from a conversation about those values. And so I think in many places reservations are the answer, but I also think that making sure that everybody's actually working with communities to help communities understand is really, really critical. And that happened, right, that happened not just, right, at the Park Visitor Center, but that's happening in community centers, that the Park Service is out there talking to folks, that NPCA is out there talking to folks and helping folks understand, right, because it's jarring. If you didn't know that, if let's say you had planned a vacation and you weren't aware, that could be a really jarring experience, right? Like, and you'd be really upset, and you're like, I've made all these investments, and right, and so we really need to make sure that people know, so that it's coming from a place of being informed.
How can we keep this conversation going?
Drinks. There's a lot of parts to this conversation, and there's a lot of responsibility, but really I'd say more than anything there's a lot of opportunity. And so one of the things that is really hard to do, and I'm a photographer, so I think about aperture, right? Can we create enough, right? Can we be kind enough to ourselves to create the space to have emotional availability, right? Can we create the space in ourselves for it to be okay to not know everything, or to have learned something that was wrong, or to have an idea that was, right, that was maybe ill-informed? I mean, we are all human beings who are just, right, we're making connections so that we can exist and move through the world. So many of the concepts, right, that exist in our mind, we didn't make intentional choices about them. They happen just by living. And then anytime you get to actually bring that back into the front of your mind and then make an active decision about it, is building power as a human. And so that's one part of it. The other part is, if you want to have these conversations, not only are there a lot of people who also do and a lot of places to do that, but if you want to talk to somebody about something, making sure that it's just consent-based. Just as simple as asking, hey, I really wanted to ask you a question about this, would that be okay? Just that little bit of consideration makes a gigantic difference because it's framing. It's not like you serve me now, or I'm thinking about this now, so now everybody's got to think about it, right? It's saying, hey, I'm thinking about this. This is what's going on for me. Are you in a place that we can talk about this, or could we talk about this another time? Or do you have any suggestions? So I think that all of those are ways that we can keep the conversation going. If I was going to recommend 2 books, Indigenous History of the United States and Stamped from the Beginning, I think that just reading those 2 books is incredible. And it's hard. And you got to be nice to yourself. But being willing to to just say, hey, the things that I learned, that's not the whole picture, that's not the whole story, and I care enough to know, but I care enough to know another side. That's a really big step. It's a really big thing. And the last thing I would say is the standard. If the standard is perfection, that you're not going to mess up, that you're going to say everything right? It's just not going to work. So when I say that folks have to be gentle to themselves and actually take care of themselves, I mean that.
Thank you. When you think about this past year, what would you say was your biggest success as well as your biggest disappointment?
There's a lot of ways I could answer that, but I will answer that in a professional way, which is my job, the department that I run has 70 human beings in it, all of whom are incredible human beings. And really being able to create space and time to show up for people, I think it's a shift in my own mind to get out of and I think that it's something that happens, or something that is hard, but that can ideally happen, which is making a change in your own mind to move from one who does to one who helps others do. Mm. And I think that making that shift in my mind was actually probably the best thing that I was able to do this year, because I was trying to help by doing. And while that helped people, I think, get things done and be really, really efficient, it didn't make their legs strong enough to take the walks that they needed to take. And so I would say that has been really important. And I think the way that I would frame that is trying to move into elder space, right? Where you move from being the one who does the stuff to one who helps folks understand how to do it. And so that's something I've been practicing, and I have a lot of baggage with that, because I have, I think, my whole life felt like I've always needed to overproduce in order to have value. I've always wanted to show people how smart I am, show people how good I am, and so it was really hard for me to let go of those reins of doing. Because especially as a person of color, you want to just make sure that you're actually adding value, because you feel like, right, it would be really easy to get dismissed. The other thing I did that I'm really proud of is I was able to take a sabbatical, and I'm more than 8 years late for that, and it was because I was scared to let go, and I let go a little bit and did that, and that was a really important thing for me.
Thank you. Someone wants you to know this. I simply want to say that I found this presentation gentle, inviting, and spiritually fulfilling. I feel motivated to embrace my own nature and move forward gracefully with others. Thank you. Would it be a bad idea for me to contradict that? Do you have a website or anything that you'd like to share?
NPCA's website is www.npca.org, and we're running campaigns all across the country, and those human beings who are doing that are remarkable human beings. We have a lot of humans in a lot of places who really, really care about what this system means and that we actually protect it. So I hope that y'all get a chance to meet and connect up with a lot of folks. And so importantly, I want to make sure I say, I'm going to be lobbying everybody who will talk to me to make sure that Cash is Cash can come and speak at Chautauqua.
Thank you so much, David. It's been a pleasure. It really has been.
CHQ Assembly is made possible through the collaboration and innovation of Chautauqua Institution's full-time and part-time staff, seasonal staff, and many volunteers, as well as participants like you, whose engagement, gifts, and subscriptions sustain our mission.